I'm divorcing you and marrying my lover. So hurry up and leave with the child.
My husband flares his nostrils arrogantly as he throws the divorce in my face. Standing next to him, his lover smirks, lifting the corners of her lips in a sneer, clinging tightly to him while staring straight at me. I had gone back to my parents' house, pregnant with our child, preparing for the birth. However, during that time, my husband never visited my parents' house, and he ignored all my attempts to contact him. When I returned home after giving birth, I found a strange woman and a little boy there.
Isn't it obvious? They're my lover and our child.
My husband, unperturbed, calmly admitted to his affair and announced he wanted a divorce. To my husband and his lover, who smirked at me, I must have seemed like a pitiful fool. But in reality, it's the opposite. I can't help but feel sorry for them, blind to their own foolishness.
You can't get a divorce.
It was my mother, who had come along with me, who declared this firmly. At her words, the smile vanished from my husband's face, and he looked at her with a puzzled expression. And then, my mother revealed a shocking truth to my husband and his lover. My name is Emily, 28 years old. I am a housewife living with my husband, Mike, who is 2 years older than me, and my in-laws. There are currently 4 of us living together, but soon, we will be 5. I am carrying new life in my belly. The due date is approaching, and my belly has become quite noticeable.
How many months are you now?
I have more and more conversations about the baby with my friendly neighbors, and I am filled with anticipation for the moment I finally get to meet my child. Of course, there are moments when I feel a bit anxious or nervous, but the joy and other positive emotions are far greater. After all, it took 5 years of marriage for us to finally conceive. To get to this point, I underwent fertility treatments multiple times. There were more than a few moments when I almost lost hope. I remember fondly the times I shed tears secretly in the bathroom or the toilet after everyone had gone to bed. Since discovering my pregnancy, I began looking forward to regular checkups. Every time I saw the baby growing on the ultrasound, my heart felt warm. When the doctor told me the baby was a girl, I dreamed of a happy future. What kind of child would she become? Whether she becomes an active child who loves playing outside or one who prefers playing indoors, I just want to enjoy our time together. Thinking about it made me smile unconsciously. However, Mike and my in-laws had a completely different reaction. We've found out the baby's gender. When I told them it was a girl, they made a clearly displeased face. They didn't seem angry, but I could see the disappointment in their expressions. It was a stark contrast to when they first learned about the pregnancy. Back then, they were genuinely happy for us, but then Mike said something outrageous.
If it's a girl, I don't want her.
My in-laws nodded in agreement with his words. How could he say such a horrible thing about his own child? Anger welled up inside me, and I tried desperately to hold it back. After that, Mike and his family began to treat me harshly. Before, when I was doing housework, my mother-in-law would say,
Emily, you should rest. Your job right now is to take care of the baby in your belly.
She used to take over the chores for me. But after the baby's gender was revealed, her demeanor changed, and she would look at me coldly.
Hey, hurry up and finish the chores.
She started making me carry heavy things, reach for items placed high up, and do other tasks that put a strain on my body.
Hey, this food tastes awful. What kind of taste buds do you have?
How could you serve us something like this? Are you out of your mind?
Neither my father-in-law nor Mike ever helped with the housework. Yet they complained incessantly. They wanted a boy to carry on the family name, and they were unhappy that the baby was a girl. But why should I have to endure such treatment because of it? I felt incredibly sad. Of course, I couldn't just sit back and take it. I couldn't stay silent in the face of such insults. No matter whether it's a boy or a girl, a child is precious all the same. Stop belittling her. I asserted myself like this many times. But they never listened. They only laughed mockingly at me.
An incompetent wife who can't give us an heir shouldn't talk back.
While I desperately pleaded, my hands and feet trembling, Mike and my in-laws remained unfazed. It was like punching a cloth curtain. No matter what I said, it had no impact on them, and I was the only one growing more mentally exhausted. The behavior of Mike and my in-laws escalated day by day.
Actually, since it's going to be a lot of trouble and cost a lot of money, why don't you just abort it?
I was horrified. I never imagined such words would come from Carol, who was supposed to be in the same position as a mother.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Tony agreed, laughing loudly. Mike was grinning as well. Do these people have no hearts? I started to avoid facing my in-laws outside of meal times by staying in my room as much as possible or taking long, slow walks. However, they would purposely come to my room just to continue hurling insults at me, saying things like abort it or you're useless. The pressure and stress pushed me beyond my limits, and I found myself secretly crying in the middle of the night, just like during my fertility treatments. Staying in this house felt like it would drive me insane. It was as if I had been thrown into a den of demons. Stressing myself out like this would negatively affect the baby, and I wouldn't be able to give birth in peace. I decided to return to my parents' home earlier than planned. I called my mother, who lived alone at home, to discuss this.
Yes, come back whenever you're ready. I know something's happened.
She must have sensed something. She welcomed me warmly. I returned to my parents' home, and the atmosphere was completely different from the house where I lived with Mike and his family. Even though there were more people in that house, it felt much lonelier than my parents' home. I realized how comforting it is to have someone who understands and stands by me. My mother always prioritized my health and well-being in our daily life. Although I was finally spending peaceful days, the lingering uneasiness hadn't completely gone away. Instead, my suspicion toward Mike and his family grew stronger. The reason was that since I came back, they hadn't contacted me even once. Of course, they hadn't come to visit either. I didn't mind not hearing from my in-laws, as I found communicating with them to be quite bothersome, but what was Mike, the father of the child, doing? He didn't show any concern for my well-being or how I was doing. My mother, too, seemed puzzled about why he hadn't reached out, and she would ask me at least once a day.
Has Mike contacted you today?
And so, without a single word exchanged, the time finally came for the birth. In the delivery room, my mother held my hand the entire time. She helped me with the breathing techniques, and even though I was in a daze, I managed to breathe properly. How much time had passed since the labor pains began? The sound of a baby crying filled the room.
Emily, you did so well. She's such a beautiful baby.
Looking into my face, my mother rejoiced at the birth of her grandchild, tears welling up in her eyes. Her face was filled with joy. Seeing that expression, I couldn't stop my own tears from flowing, too. They were, of course, tears of happiness. Yet, deep down, a dark feeling lingered, wondering why Mike wasn't there. Of course, I had contacted him as soon as the labor pains started. I sent multiple messages, not just one, and called several times. But all I got was the relentless beeping of the phone. He never answered. Even when my mother tried to call from her smartphone, he still didn't pick up. I stayed at my parents' house for about 2 months after giving birth. My days were chaotic, filled with changing diapers, breastfeeding, and dealing with a crying baby at night. I felt deeply grateful to have my mother with me. Whenever the baby cried at night,
Here, I'll take care of it. Emily, you should rest.
she would soothe the baby, allowing me to get some sleep. Even after the baby was born, I continued to contact Mike and his parents daily. I sent photos and videos of the baby, but it was unclear if they even looked at them. The phone calls never went through, and my worry and distrust continued to grow. I knew I couldn't go on like this forever. I decided to return to the house where I had lived with Mike and his family, bringing my child with me. I felt reassured that my mother was coming along. I took the house key out of my bag and unlocked the door. My hand was trembling slightly, perhaps from the nervousness of seeing Mike and the others again after so long. As I slowly turned the doorknob and began to open the door, I sensed something unusual. I heard a high-pitched, childish voice and the laughter of a woman I didn't recognize. My mind went blank, and I threw the door wide open. In the entranceway were a pair of small blue shoes, about the size of my palm, and a pair of women's sneakers. I didn't recognize either of them. My mother saw them too, and her face turned pale. We hurried towards the living room, where the voices were coming from, and there we found a woman and a little boy we didn't know. Who are you? I blurted out in a voice of surprise, and the woman turned to face me. Then Mike and my in-laws appeared from the back of the room, noticing my voice. Who are these people? Do you know them? I asked hesitantly. Mike, without any sign of panic, calmly placed his hand on the woman's shoulder and pulled her close. The closeness between them made it clear that their relationship was not ordinary. The woman, with a satisfied expression, leaned against Mike as if to flaunt herself to me.
Isn't it obvious? She's my lover, and that's our child.
What? Huh? Your child? I looked back and forth between the child in my arms and the little boy. He called her his lover, but wasn't she just his mistress? The boy looked to be around 2 years old, suggesting that Mike had been involved with this woman for about 3 years.
What did you expect? It's boring to be with someone as plain as you. If you want to blame someone, blame yourself for being the kind of woman who gets cheated on.
He laughed loudly, shamelessly. Even though my mother was standing behind me, he continued to say cruel things without care. I glanced over at my in-laws, but they seemed indifferent as usual, not showing any sign of reproaching Mike for his infidelity. How long had they known about this? I couldn't understand why I, who had done nothing wrong, was being ridiculed by the very people who had cheated.
Sorry for stealing your husband.
The mistress, Beth, let out a sneering laugh and deliberately clung to Mike's arm. According to what I heard, her name was Beth. She was quite young, only 24. She worked at a nightclub, and that's where she met Mike. Hearing this, I realized why he had often come home late. So he had been lying about working overtime to meet her. They started seeing each other outside the club, and their relationship became intimate, leading to Beth getting pregnant. At first, Mike kept the existence of his illegitimate child a secret, but as soon as he learned that the child I was carrying was a girl, he told his parents about his son. His parents, who had wanted a boy, were overjoyed. To them, the fact that there was an heir was more important than the infidelity itself.
Of course, a mistress who can bear a son is better than a useless wife who can only have girls.
Hearing those words from my father-in-law, I glared at him sharply.
So, I'm divorcing you and marrying Beth. Get out of here with your child.
Mike flared his nostrils arrogantly, throwing the divorce in my face. Beth smirked, clinging tightly to him while staring straight at me. To them, I must have seemed like a pathetic fool. But in reality, it was the opposite. I couldn't help but feel sorry for them, blind to their own foolishness.
You can't get a divorce.
It was my mother who declared this firmly. At her words, the smile disappeared from Mike's face, and he looked at her with a puzzled expression.
Because the only reason you've been able to succeed is that you're Emily's husband.
In fact, the company Mike worked for belonged to my mother's brother. Mike himself wasn't particularly skilled at his job. The only reason he had been promoted was because of his connections. Divorcing me would mean losing his position.
And besides, you were embezzling company funds, weren't you?
Perhaps because he got carried away after getting his position, Mike had even committed embezzlement. If this came to light, he wouldn't be able to avoid a criminal case.
If you try to escape by getting a divorce, I will report you to the police.
At my mother's words, the color drained from Mike's face. He turned pale as a sheet of paper, and his mouth opened and closed like a goldfish searching for food. He seemed to be searching for an excuse, but apparently found none.
If I don't get a divorce, will you forgive me for the embezzlement?
His arrogant attitude towards me had completely shifted, and he was now begging my mother for leniency. But my mother slowly shook her head in refusal.
You'll pay for child support, alimony, and the embezzled money in full.
At those words, the strength drained from Mike's body, and he collapsed helplessly to the floor in a pathetic heap. My mother leaned in to emphasize her point, and he nodded weakly, repeatedly. And after you divorce me, you must not continue your luxurious lifestyle as you have been. I added that as a firm warning. Mike had a habit of wasting money, filling the house with expensive ties, handkerchiefs, and socks he never even used. Mike nodded to my words, but Beth looked slightly uneasy. She seemed somewhat dissatisfied, her lips pouting slightly. However, I ignored her reaction and turned my gaze back toward Mike and my in-laws. I was about to add something else, but my words were cut off by my mother-in-law's angry outburst.
How dare you, you insolent woman! A barren mare like you!
Interrupted, I swallowed the words I was about to say. After that, Mike was not reported to the police. However, he was eventually dismissed from the company, receiving a disciplinary termination. A year has passed, and I was living happily with my child. no longer subjected to insults and abuse from Mike and his parents, my heart felt light and free. One day, as their memories began to fade from my mind, Mike and his family appeared at my door, as if to remind me that they wouldn't allow themselves to be forgotten. They were in stark contrast to their former selves, appearing in tattered clothes. Just like Mike, my in-laws had been extravagant spenders. They were already retired with no salary coming in, yet they frequently withdrew money from our savings account to buy luxury items. Perhaps because of this, they used to look quite youthful with their fashionable attire. But now, all of them were dressed in the same worn-out sweatshirts and tracksuits, looking like completely different people. Their hair was disheveled, as if they couldn't afford a trip to the hairdresser. It was evident that they were struggling financially.
It's your fault we're forced to live in such poverty.
Mike was ranting, but it certainly wasn't my fault. It was all the result of their own actions. From what I gathered, he was currently looking for a new job. He was limiting his search to the same industry as his previous job, but his reputation was already widely known in the field, for all the wrong reasons. The reason for his dismissal from his last job had spread, and it seemed to be preventing him from finding employment. With no other choice, he had started doing part-time work, just to earn some daily income. It seemed they weren't exactly starving, since he was working from morning till night, but it was clear they were not living comfortably either. They had accumulated debt and were burdened with monthly repayments. Even when they managed to earn money, most of it went toward paying off their debts. They could only afford discounted deli food from the supermarket just before closing time, managing only one meal a day. Despite hearing all this, I couldn't feel any sympathy. I didn't even nod. I just listened quietly while staring at Mike and his parents. The child Beth had brought with her was glancing around in confusion, holding on to his grandmother's hand. That's when I noticed that Beth, Mike's mistress, was not there. Had they not married after our divorce? Sensing my gaze, Mike's shoulders slumped in resignation.
Beth ran away, leaving only the child behind.
Apparently, Beth had abandoned Mike when he ran out of money. I recalled her uneasy expression when I warned Mike against leading a luxurious lifestyle. She had only cared about his money, not Mike himself. Another shocking truth emerged to add to Mike's despair. There was no blood relation between him and Beth's child. After Beth left,
Is this child really Mike's? He doesn't look like him at all.
this remark prompted a DNA test, which confirmed that Mike was not the child's father. That thing I was going to tell you back then, actually, the reason for our infertility was you. Back then referred to the last time we saw each other, a year ago. I had wanted to point out that the boy didn't resemble Mike, but Carol had interrupted me. Just like the relatives, I had also intended to question the similarity between the boy and Mike. Mike seemed to be in a panic. He was silent, standing there unable to move. At that moment, a man appeared. He was holding a small boy in his arms, and when he looked at me, he flashed a sparkling smile that seemed almost animated.
Who's this?
The voice Mike used was eerily familiar. It was exactly the same as mine when I had seen Beth entering my home. He's my son. Yes, the truth was that the child born a year ago was not a girl, but a boy. In the ultrasound photos, the lower body was hidden, leading to the mistake of thinking it was a girl. The moment Mike realized I had given birth to a son, He immediately did a complete turnaround.
Please, forgive me. I want to start over.
He begged, but I already had a new husband. The man currently holding my son. When I introduced him to Mike, his expression immediately sharpened, and he started hurling insults at me.
You tramp. You were cheating on me, weren't you?
I started seeing him after I divorced you. So, no, I wasn't cheating. Don't compare me to someone like you, who had an affair and even a secret child. Enraged, Mike staggered toward my husband and tried to snatch my son from his arms.
Hey, what do you think you're doing?
Shut up. Look, I'm your real father, not this man. I'm your father.
He tried to claim he was the father, but my son rejected him. He turned red in the face, crying and screaming, refusing to leave my husband's arms. Perhaps shocked by this, Mike lowered his hands and slumped over. I looked down at him sharply and spoke calmly. If you keep bothering us, I will report you to the police. At that, Mike and his parents panicked, stumbling and nearly falling as they hurriedly left my home. I thought mentioning the word police would finally keep them away, but I was naive. Even after that, they continued to send messages and make phone calls numerous times. It seemed they believed that as long as they didn't physically come to our house, it was fine. But I had clearly warned them that I would report them if they continued to harass me, not just if they came to the house. Once I filed for a restraining order, my smartphone finally stopped ringing incessantly. I couldn't help but worry about Beth's child, surrounded by people like that. After all, the child was innocent. While I was concerned, I heard a rumor from a mutual friend of Mike and me. Apparently, Mike and his parents had been neglecting the child to the point that a suspicious neighbor reported them to Child Protective Services, and they ended up having to deal with the police. The child was taken in by Beth's parents. Unlike their daughter, they seemed to be serious people who genuinely cared for their grandchild. Hearing this, I felt a sense of relief. Mike and his family were left penniless, and the news of their trouble spread, so they moved far away. I was finally free from my in-laws. Now, I am carrying a second new life in my belly. I decided to be happy with my husband and children and began envisioning a bright future in my mind. How did you find this story? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. I'll see you in the next video.